Okay, it's time for another episode of the Press Box Podcast, episode number 17, if you're counting at home. I'm Ralph Miranda, along with my co-host, Joseph Miranda. And today we've got a couple of subjects we're going to touch on. We've got, as many of you probably know, the recent college basketball scandal has hit the airwaves with players being paid to sign with certain teams, money being changed hands between players and apparel manufacturers, and coaches being implicated in making decisions to pay players to get to come to their school. And that's beginning to bubble over in a big way, and bubble over at the wrong time, actually, because we're getting very close to NCAA tournament time. So the ramifications could be swift, and they could be very damaging to many of these schools. So we're going to touch on that and talk about some of those things. We've also are only a week away from NFL free agency. And as many of you who follow NFL football probably know, Blake Bortles just re-signed with the Jacksonville Jaguars, a 3-year contract. So he's off the market, and the Jaguars are they're not in the market for a quarterback anymore. So that's going to affect some of the other free agents that may be coming out, especially Kirk Cousins, who will be a free agent from the Washington Redskins here in about a week or so. So we'll talk about that. Interesting time in sports right now, a little bit of a dull time. And I say that only because, baseball's not yet started up yet. Golf is kind of getting close to the major season, and NFL football and college football is over. But nonetheless, many exciting topics on the Press Box Podcast to talk about. Want to remind you, our major sponsor is Bonus Room Art. Make sure you go to www.bonusroomart.com. Check out the prints that are on sale there. Great prints, a new multimedia tab that you can check out to show you some of the progress that our producer Nathan's been working on, some of those prints. We want to make sure that we get you to go to Bonus Room Art. Also, go to our blog at theoldlinebacker.com. That's www.theoldlinebacker.com. You can listen to the podcast there as well as on iTunes. You can subscribe on iTunes and get it downloaded to your iTunes podcast app every time a new podcast hits the scene. Or you can go to the blog, theoldlinebacker.com, and listen to it there, as well as get certain commentary on different sports and different topics, as well as inspirational blogs as well, to keep you invested in what's going on in the world of sports. So lots to talk about today. We got plenty of more guests coming on as we get into the month of March. So without further ado, let's get into episode 17 of the Press Box Podcast.
All right, so I want to start with some of the news that's come out recently with specifically college basketball about some of the pay-to-play scandal type stuff based on whether it's coaches or AAU coaches or apparel brand people paying recruits or families recruits, or the family of recruits, to play for their college basketball team. So I think that there was a report released by Yahoo recently detailing a lot of this, which you have to know that this probably goes on at a lot of these schools that deal with these one and done players. But what's your just initial reaction to this type of stuff when you hear that it comes out?
Well, my initial reaction is you want to say it's one of shock, but it's really not. I mean, it's pretty obvious over the last 20 years at least that there's a seedy underbelly of college basketball, right? And it may be college football too, I don't know, but we just haven't heard any reports. But it just seems like there's a seedy underbelly of that sport where, especially when you get into this AAU. See, in football, you don't have that. You don't have this summer basketball or summer leagues that they play in. So you don't have all these people with their hands out trying to make connections from one group to the next. So my initial reaction is, it doesn't surprise me a whole lot. What surprises me is the number of schools that have been mentioned. I think I read an article a couple of days ago. They were breaking it down by schools whose coaches had been implicated, schools who'd had recruits that were implicated, schools that, had coaches that maybe were implicated. And when you look at it, there were at least 30 schools, top schools that you would find in the top 25 on a regular basis that had been implicated in some form or fashion. And, that's really, it's really unacceptable when you think about it, because, you've got a couple things going on here. You've got coaches who obviously are paid to win. All right. So they're going to try to get the recruits that they need to get. And in college basketball, as you know, all you need is one or two guys can make a difference between being out of the top 25 or playing for a national championship.
Right.
So, they're all going after those one or two big name guys. All right. Then you've got these, for the lack of a better term, scumbags, AAU coaches or middlemen that want to make the connection between recruits and the coaches at the schools and get paid for it. You've got these apparel manufacturers that, want to get their shoes or their practice uniforms or their clothing worn by the schools. So you've got money going from one hand to the next. You've got, coaches who are trying to get players, and then in the middle, you've got the players. And most of the time, whether you want to admit to it or not, most of these players that are playing college basketball and some college football too, don't come from affluent homes. So money is important to them, and it's important to their families as well. So you've got a situation that just breeds, it breeds illegalities. It breeds unethical behavior, and that's the unfortunate thing about the whole situation.
Yeah, I think that the way you put it, a lot of times you can't really blame the player just based on what you talked about coming out of their backgrounds, whatever it may be. Because if you think about it, if you're a player and you're a top recruit, a college basketball recruit, you know that your eyes in the NBA, you know that you're only going to stay at your school for 1 year. That's
Right.
your plan anyway. So you're not really concerned about the implications that you taking money from someone might affect your school.
Right.
Yeah, you're going to be there for basically a semester, then you're gone.
Right.
So, do you think that changing this one and done rule at all will have any effect on that at all? Because I think they should make it more like baseball. See, so baseball, you can come out of high school and enter the MLB draft. But if you choose to go to college, you have to stay for 3 years.
Right.
So maybe you make it 2 years in basketball. You have to stay for 2 years. I think they should adopt something like that. I know it's a little different in baseball when you start talking about junior colleges. I think that you can, I guess, leave after your first or second year there. It's a little different. But, do you think that changes anything, or do you still think that you'd see some of this?
No, I agree with you 100%. I think the rule should be changed to more like the baseball rule. And you're exactly right. Let's look at it realistically. If you're a high school basketball player that's considered to be a can't miss prospect, okay? And you've got no money at all. Your family's got no money at all right? And you're approached, they're going to give you $100,000 to sign with some particular school, all right? And that $100,000 is going to pay off your family's mortgage, or it's going to buy your family a house, or whatever it may be. And you're right. You go to that school, you play, you leave after 1 year, you go to the NBA. You don't care what happens to the school.
Right.
The coaches don't care, right? Because if they get two of those guys and they win a national championship, all right. So now they've done what they're supposed to do, and the middlemen get what they're supposed to do. But what the players that it hurts are the ones that aren't those can't miss prospects, the ones that, maybe had a chance to go to those schools, but didn't get a chance to go for whatever reason now. So I agree with you. I think you ought to set it more like baseball. If you're a can't miss prospect and you want to go to the NBA out of high school, go. But if you sign that letter of intent to play in college, you've got to stay for 3 years or 2 years, however you want to set it up, before you can leave. And that might alleviate some of the problem. I don't know. But I think it's better than the current situation, because you look at a school like Kentucky, all right? John Calipari has been notorious for building his program on one and dones. The last 3 or 4 years, he's had, this year, not so much. This year, they've struggled. But the last 4 or 5 years or so, he's had, 4 or 5 unbelievable freshmen, and he's made a run to the Final Four.
Yeah.
And then those guys all leave, okay? And then he recruits a whole nother bunch. And I've even heard a report, I've even read articles that say that when Calipari recruits these guys, he tells them, hey, you're only here for 1 year, okay? In other words, your scholarship is gone after 1 year, right? In other words, I want you for 1 year, and then I want you gone to the NBA, and I'm going to bring in a whole nother set of guys. So, yeah, that breeds a situation where you're going to have, illegalities. You're going to have people trying to make the best they can of the situation, whether it be the player, whether it be the AAU coach, whether it be the college coach, and you're going to set yourself up for that kind of problem.
Yeah, I mean, and this all helps the college coaches too, because I mean, if you can establish yourself as somebody who puts guys in the NBA, however you do it, whether it be through some back channel type deals or if you can get some of those guys, you position yourself as a top coach in the sport just based on that. Because if you're a kid coming out and you're looking at schools to go to, okay, well, that there's a track record of guys that come from Kentucky, like you got whoever, John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins. There's guys after guys that go there for a year and are top NBA picks. So you're thinking, oh, okay, I'm gonna go to that school. Well, other coaches and Duke is like that too, and there's some other schools, but these coaches that don't recruit one and done type guys that probably in large part do things the right way. Although if you look at this report, there seems to be a lot of coaches that don't, but that in large part do the things the right way. You're not going to get those top recruits most likely, right, because there's not a track record of you, putting out one and done players and getting those top prospects. So it hurts all the schools that are trying to do things the right way, in my opinion.
No, you're exactly right. And the sport itself lends itself to that particular situation. And what I mean by that is, if you're a college basketball team and let's say you have two guys that are top prospects, that are NBA type guys, okay? In basketball, you can win with those two guys. I mean, because if those guys can shoot the lights out, or they can control the boards, or they can, shoot the mid-range jumper, or they can play great, whatever it may be, all right, you're going to dominate. Now, college football is not that way. I mean, you may get the best quarterback in the land, okay, or you may get the best running back in the land, but you've got 22 on 22. You've got a physical game, and those guys cannot always dominate the contest. I mean, if you're a quarterback, you got to have the receivers running the right routes. He's got to read the right defense. You've got to have the blocking from the offensive line. I mean, you've got to have so many things happen in college football to make that particular recruit successful, that it doesn't necessarily, having one or two of those guys doesn't necessarily guarantee you success. In college basketball, it does. All right. So you're exactly right. I mean, that's the situation, and somehow they've got to figure out how to get around it. Now, you take a look at Louisville. I mean, Louisville, for example, Rick Pitino has shown himself to be, for lack of a better way to put it, probably one of the lowlifes in college basketball coaching. Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry. First of all, the guy has a major sex scandal of his own back in 2009. All right, he gets away with that one. And then you have the situation a few years ago where they had like strippers, brought in, or ladies of the night, for lack of a better way to say it, seeing these recruits. He got away with that one. And now he finally got caught with the pay for play type situation, and he was fired. And they took away their national championship. They had to vacate their 2013 national championship. And now he's lamenting that fact. Well, I mean, come on. I mean, you got away with two of them, and now the third one bit you, and you want to say that it shouldn't happen. So, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that they're ever going to solve the problem, but something's got to be done. And I think maybe the way you do it is either change the rules, or you get rid of the coach for good. I mean, that's the only way to put it. And really, you take Auburn, for example. Bruce Pearl is the coach now at Auburn. Well, he had to leave Tennessee for the same, not the same thing, but a pretty much of a scandal where, there was recruiting violations, and he was cited for show cause, with how they call it, and he was prevented from coaching for 2 or 3 years. He comes back to Auburn, and now one of his main assistants was implicated in this scandal. I mean, so, there's got to be some ramifications for coaches who are hiring these assistant coaches, because, as I've said thousands of times, what I learned in business school is you cannot delegate. You could delegate authority, but you can't delegate responsibility. So if you're hiring these guys, you can give them the authority to go recruit and get guys in, but if they screw up, it's your responsibility. And somehow they've got to fire these guys, get rid of them, and they could never coach again if that's the situation. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen, and therefore it keeps fostering more behavior like this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and we're talking about college basketball now because the recent news has come out about it. But I mean, this happens in football too. The Reggie Bush stuff from
Sure.
2005, and then the Cam Newton stuff. Although that was never really, I guess, proven as much as the Reggie Bush stuff where they stripped his Heisman. But it happens in football too. So I mean, um, another big topic that we hadn't really discussed here on the podcast yet is about paying college players. So, what's your idea in terms of allowing these players in the revenue sports, like specifically football and basketball? I know football is a higher revenue sport than basketball, but giving them, I guess, a piece of the pie. So you would say, based on the fact that these sports and these coaches and the schools make so much revenue, paying the players some amount. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, on our last podcast, John Bryce mentioned a little bit of this when he talked about, football is the cash cow for most of these universities.
Right.
And these athletic directors and presidents are saying, you've got to add another game. We need more money. We need money to fund these Title IX programs, these women's sports, and some of these non-revenue sports. And the only way you can get this money is by playing more games
Right.
and by being successful. Okay, so again, that breeds doing whatever you have to do to become successful. All right. Now, when it comes to paying players, I used to be against it, but I'm starting to be for it. And the reason I say that is because you look at these kids that come in and play. All right. There's so many, you got to do one of two things. Either you've got to pay the players. All right. Because these kids come in with no money. All right. They can't go on a date. They can't go out to eat. They can't go home during a break because they can't afford it. All right. There's so many rules that say you can't help them to doing this. You can't give them a ride. You can't even give these guys a ride somewhere. Okay.
Yeah.
So now what happens? Somehow these kids are going to get money, and it's going to be done through boosters. It's going to be done through athletic apparel. The money's going to be funneled through 2 or 3 different sources so that it can be laundered. And again, that brings up the situation where you have these problems. All right. So if you pay the players, all right, if you give them a so-called piece of the pie, they can succeed. They can have a normal college life. All right. That's one way to look at it. The second way to look at it may be set up a 2-tiered system. Okay. In other words, a large majority of college athletes, whether it be football or basketball, are not going to go to the professional level. Okay.
Right.
They're just playing college football because they want to. All right.
Right.
So either you set it up where you say, hey, you either take the professional track or you take the non-professional track. And if you take the professional track, this is how it's going to be set up. And if you don't, then this is how it's going to be set up. I mean, I know that sounds kind of oversimplified, but you're right. I mean, we're coming to a point. I mean, I thought it's going to happen before now, but it's getting to be this point where, eventually you're going to have these players, boycott. They're going to say, hey, we're not going to play in this Final Four game, okay, because we don't get anything out of it. We're bringing millions of dollars to this school, but we're not getting anything out of it. And let's say they get hurt, or let's say that they don't perform up to the level they're performing from. If they're not doing well in school, which a lot of them aren't, they're only there because they want to make it to the NFL or the NBA, then they're drummed out. They don't even have an education, okay? So either you got to set up a trust fund for these guys that says, okay, we're going to put this money in a trust fund for you, all right, so that when you get out of college, if you don't make it to the NBA, you have a nest egg of money there that you can at least start some sort of a career, all right, or make some sort of a living. But if you make it to the NBA, then you can do what you want with this money, either give it to charity, do whatever you want with it. But there's got to be some system to set up to do that, because right now, these kids, they can't do anything. All right. Yeah. But they're making millions and millions of dollars for these guys. Okay. Right. And also you run into the apparel thing. You look at the NFL. Let's talk football for just 1 minute. Basketball is the same way. In the NBA or the NFL, they sell these jerseys with these players' names on it. Well, in college, you can buy jerseys too. You know as well as I do. How many times have we seen a Florida football jersey with the number 15 on it during the time Tim Tebow was in it? Right. Well, it may not have had Tebow's name on the back of it, but you knew pretty well that was Tim Tebow's jersey. Okay. Right. Did he get any money off of that? No. Didn't get a penny off of that. But they were using his likeness and his success to make money for somebody, whether it be the athletic apparel manufacturer, whether it be the university, whether it be the NCAA, whatever. That money was being made and it was being funneled into places where it could do good for the schools. But the player didn't get a penny from it. All right. So yeah, you're right. I mean, they've got to either pay these players or set up some system where you can shut off this illegal money or this laundered money that's coming into the sport.
Right. So I'm thinking about something like, and we'll just use college basketball as an example. maybe something like how baseball has Aries team has I guess you could even call it like you could use the salary cap example or this example. Like baseball has a when their teams are trying to sign international free agents, so maybe like think of like a Yasiel Puig coming over from Cuba, or anybody like that. They have an amount of money in their international signing bonus pool money. All right,
Right.
so maybe you give a lot of the amount of money to these schools like Kentucky or Duke. You have $2 million, $3 million, whatever it is that you can give to these recruits as a signing bonus. Okay, um, so say you're Kentucky and you're recruiting the top guy in the country, and you negotiate a $1.5 million signing bonus. That's fine.
Right.
And you have whatever left to sign other recruits, right? So I think
Right.
that would also um, you know help the parity of the sport a little bit, because if you look at somebody like Duke, who I think, and I don't keep up with college basketball recruiting religiously like some people, but they've gotten, I think, three of the top guys in this next year's class to commit to them. Where on the surface, yeah, that's easy because you can get all the recruits you want because you can just get as many guys you want, and who knows if these guys are paid anyway or not. But if you have some amount of salary cap or money pool limit where that you can give out to these guys, well, if you have Kentucky somehow sign the top two recruits, well, they don't have any money left to give this other recruit. Well, okay, and he thinks, hey, I'll go to Kansas or one of these other schools, right? So
Right.
I think that's one way you could do it, where you're not really paying them a salary, you're just giving them a signing bonus, to sign with your school. And if you use up your bonus money on one guy, then so be it. You can't get anybody else based on that. So I think that's one way you could do it. And I didn't think that. I'm sure there's potholes in that argument too, but that's just one way off the top of my head that I think would be good.
I think that's an excellent point. I mean, I've never heard it put that way, but I think it's an excellent point because that would solve the problem because they're getting the money now, right? We
Yeah,
found it. We found that out this week, right?
yeah,
That the money is getting to them somehow and is getting to them through illegal sources or through unethical sources. So you're right. If you give each school a pot of money that says, okay, this is what you've got for this year, you can use it as you see fit. Okay. So you're right. If you need this one guy and you think he's the best guy out there and you use the majority of your money, so be it. Then you're not going to get two or three of the other guys.
right.
All right. I think that's a great idea. The other problem I think we've got going on here, which nobody wants to fess up to, okay, is that we keep hearing this student athlete. Okay, well that's ridiculous. All right. Now, for the majority of sports in college, everything but basketball and football, that is true. They are student athletes. Okay, they're playing their sports, whether it be tennis, golf, volleyball, you name it. Okay, baseball, whatever it is. These are student athletes. Okay, they're not going to go pro, and if they go pro, all right, very very few of them are going to go pro. All right,
Mm-hmm.
but when you get into basketball and football, yeah, there's some in there that are student athletes, all right, but the majority of them, when you look at the top schools in those sports, okay, they're not student athletes, okay? They're not there for an education. I'm sorry to say that. People can laugh at me or be mad at me. They're not there for that. The top ones are there for one reason. They're there to fulfill a requirement because they have to, all
Right,
right? In football, they have to, right? They can't go to the NFL unless they go to college.
right,
And in basketball, they have to go for at least 1 year. So they're going because they have to. They don't care about the school. They don't care about any reputation to that school. They don't care about any illegalities that may go on. They're there to stamp their ticket and fill that requirement until they can get on to their professional ranks. So I don't want to hear about student athletes. So that leads to your argument that yeah, go ahead and pay them up front. Give them a signing bonus,
yeah,
right? And if they come there, if they wash out, they've still got their signing bonus. Now it's up to them to be smart with it. If
right,
they don't wash out, all right, fine. They've got their signing bonus. They can do what they want with it, and they can go on and make their professional career. But to sit here under this fake umbrella that says, oh, we're student. These are student athletes. We can't pay them because we're giving them an education. That's BS. Okay, that's BS. You're
yeah.
not giving them. You're giving them the chance for an education, but most of them aren't taking advantage of that.
Right. And that's the most ridiculous in basketball because guys you really only have to be eligible past your fall semester, right? So I mean,
Exactly.
once Christmas break rolls around and they enter their spring, I mean, they could basically quit going to class because if they rule ineligible for the next term, they're gone anyway. So
Exactly.
in football, you have to at least be eligible for 3 years. Now, whether how that happens all the time, who knows? Either with some people, some programs, I'm sure, but yeah, absolutely. I think it's ridiculous, and again, more so in basketball because, like for the reason I just said, and also because guys are more of, how do I want to put this? I guess because you only have to stay the 1 year, so you're more of a sure thing, I guess, because
Right.
In football, you could be a 5-star recruit, say running back, whatever position, and you have the 3 years is a long time. So I mean, things could play out different ways. Maybe the school you committed to doesn't run the right offense that features you this way or that way, and it may hurt your draft stock here or there. You may not pan out, but in basketball, you play a handful or 15, 20 games in a season or so, and then probably more than that. But and then you're gone. So I think you're more of a sure thing in basketball. So guys are less inclined to even consider the school part at all. Whereas in football, that 3-year time period, you're not as much of a sure thing to get to the NFL.
Yeah, that's a good point. And to piggyback on that argument, in football, you've got to develop, right? I mean, if you've got 3 years there and let's say you're the top ranked quarterback coming out of high school,
right.
All right. Yeah. All right. You may be, but you've got to develop. I mean, you're not going to be able to play 3 years and turn that into an NFL contract unless you've become stronger,
right.
bigger, quicker on your release. Or if you're a running back, stronger, faster, being able to take hits. If you're a linebacker, a defensive back, whatever it is. So you've got to develop, all right? You've got to become better over those 3 years. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. In basketball, I would argue you don't have to. I mean, if you can shoot the lights out from 35 feet, I mean, I don't care how big, strong, fast you are, nobody's going to be able to take that away from you, right? So if you're able to get that guy open on the perimeter, set up a screen, if he can shoot, period, okay? If he's a big man and he's able to be in the middle, I mean, he's going to be able to dominate for that 1 year. Now, when he gets to the NBA, he may have to develop, but he doesn't have to in college. So that's why, to go back to what you said, that's why if you change the rule more like baseball where they have to stay 3 years, now you've got a different situation. Okay, now you're going to have to get better. You're going to have to, sharpen your skills to be able to become an NBA player. And I think you're doing most of these kids a disservice because let's say you are the top recruit coming out of high school in basketball, and let's say that after 1 year you declare for the NBA draft, all right? Well, I mean, you may not be ready. I mean,
right.
You may have dominated in college, but you still may not be ready coming out because you're only 19 years old, and unless you're a LeBron James or a Kevin Garnett or one of these guys, you may struggle in the NBA. And if you don't get taken in the top round, if you get taken in the end of the second round or less than that, you're not going to make it. I mean, it's not going to happen.
That is going to be my next point. Is I think that, the one and done the way it is now, I think hurts the quality of the league a little bit because, basically, like you said, guys are coming out before they're ready, and they may get drafted, like you said, but they're not really having a career. I mean, they're not ready for the NBA, so they initially struggle, and then they get bounced around from team to team, and by 4 or 5 years, they're out of the league. And they went the one and done route, and you alluded to this earlier. They basically didn't go to college at all. They didn't go,
Right.
So that's kind of it for them. Whereas, guys, if you take it back years, guys like Michael Jordan, who widely is considered the best basketball player of all time, he went to college for 3 years.
Exactly.
A lot of guys in the '80s did that, '90s, and I think that that helped the NBA out because you had a more mature league where guys, when they got to the NBA, they had this 3 and 4 years of college under their belt. I think that the fact that there was as many teams probably total in the '80s and even early '90s, I think that helped the quality of the league play. And guys like LeBron and Kobe, and they're outliers that come out of high school and go on to have historic careers. So I think that obviously I'm not saying to mandate that you have to go to college for 3 or 4 years, but I think overall it helped the quality of play in the NBA as well.
Well, let's look at another point to go along with that. I mean, how many times you've been watching NFL games on Sunday? In college they play. Let's say you go to an Alabama or one of the top schools, you may play 13 games in college or 14 games. Okay, in the NFL you're going to play 16 games.
Yeah.
All right. plus the preseason games, all right, plus the playoffs if your team is fortunate enough to make it there. So how many times have we heard on an NFL broadcast of a rookie when he gets into game 12, 13, or 14, hits the quote unquote rookie wall, okay? Because they have to play, they're playing extra games, and the physicality of it, remember, is a whole lot greater because in college they're playing against athletes that might be of lesser quality than they are. In the NFL, they're not, okay? In basketball, it's even worse, right? In basketball, you may play 30 games in college if your team makes it to the Final Four. In the NBA, you're playing 82 games, okay? Right. And then when you throw in the playoffs, you're playing 3 times the amount of games you played in college. If you're 19 years old, okay, and you're not physically developed yet, because let's face it, most young men don't hit their prime until they're about 21 or 22. How are you going to be able to do that? How are you, when you hit game 50 and you're on the road, I mean, that becomes quite a difficult situation for these young guys to maneuver. And you hit it right on the head. Unless you're an outlier like a LeBron James or one of these guys, it's not going to work. And I would guarantee you, if you look at LeBron James in his first year, I'll bet you he was not the player he is today.
No, obviously not. Yeah, a lot of guys weren't like that, right?
Okay, so that's exactly right. That's the disservice that's being done to these kids. And if you're a college coach, you don't care, right? I mean, if you get these kids for 1 year, you make it to the Final Four, they go on their way, you move on. Nobody really has the best interest of these players at heart. That's the issue that we're talking about here, is these players are getting used in the situation, and the schools are suffering the ramifications of the illegal and unethical actions. So, yeah, I mean, you're right on.
Yeah, and I think that was a good discussion, and something that, one way or another we'll probably get back to here eventually is, we got college football starting up, in the summer and in the spring practice and things like that. But before we leave, let's hit on some players that do get paid, get paid legally above board.
Right.
Talk a little bit about some NFL free agency stuff. So, I guess the latest news is yesterday. We're recording this on a Sunday, but yesterday, I think it was yesterday, maybe Friday, the Jaguars signed Blake Bortles to a 3-year deal?
3-year deal, yeah.
3-year deal. All right. So he's their quarterback of at least somewhat immediate future, they've stated. And I think he earned that based on, when we've talked about the Jaguars and their playoff run. I think that
right.
He probably did earn that deal, and I think that Jaguars are going to be a good team going into this year. So with that being said, you look at the Jaguars, who a lot of people talked about as a potential landing spot for Kirk Cousins, who's also going to be a free agent.
Right.
So that's off the table for them. So where do you? We'll start with Kirk Cousins. Where do you see him most likely to sign here as NFL free agency starts in early March? And what do you think about that signing for the Jaguars also?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, it kind of took me a little bit by surprise. I don't know if it did you, but because we've talked about that. I mean, we talked about how the Jaguars were just one quarterback away from making a Super Bowl run. I mean, we talked about the analysis of their game with the Patriots and what Bortles did or didn't do and what they were able to not do late in the game. So it kind of took me a little bit by surprise that they thought that Bortles was the guy to get him there. Okay, yeah. Maybe they know what we don't know, but I think, probably it was a good idea for the Jaguars because they feel like they've got all the pieces in place, and to make a drastic change like that at quarterback may not be the good idea. Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to Cousins, that opens up an interesting Pandora's box, because I was reading an article on NFL.com where they were analyzing all the different places that Kirk Cousins could go to. And, some of the teams that they're talking about that would be good fits for him are the Jets, are going to make a push for him, the Broncos, the Buffalo Bills, the Arizona Cardinals, and the Jaguars were one of those. And the final analysis by this writer was the Jaguars are the place for him to go. Well, obviously now that's not going to happen. Okay. Right. So what happens now? The Redskins just made a trade right after the Super Bowl to bring Alex Smith over. And I question that somewhat because you've got a guy in Kirk Cousins. All right. He's 20. What is he? 29. Okay. So he's 29 years old. All right. Alex Smith is 32, 33 years old. Okay. And while Alex Smith has been a very good quarterback, I'm not going to take anything away from the guy. He's been a very good quarterback. He's not gotten any team past the first round of the playoffs. Yeah. Okay. Kirk Cousins hasn't done that either, but Kirk Cousins has performed pretty well. All right. And you've paid him quite a bit of money over the last 2 years with the franchise tag. So now you're willing to throw him to the side and bring in a guy that, that really is 4 or 5 years older. So his career is not going to be as long, and you think he's going to take you to the promised land. And it's obvious that whether they've asked him not to do this or not, or whether he's not able to, he can't get the ball down the field. He's not been able to get the ball deep down the field. All right. Cousins has been able to do that. So now you've got Cousins on the free agent market. Well, let's take a look at some of these teams. All right. The Broncos would be a good landing place for him, right? I mean, they've got Brock Osweiler back there, who obviously is not the right answer.
Yeah.
Trevor Siemian, who they just came out and said he's available. They're willing to trade him.
Right.
So he's not going to be their quarterback next year. And you got the kid that they signed out of Memphis, the rookie that they signed, that obviously they're not sure whether he's going to be the guy or not. So I think that would be a good landing spot for Cousins. But I wonder if their window's closed. I wonder if that defense is getting a little older, and I wonder if they're going to be able to make a run even with a Kirk Cousins. All right, let's take a look at the Jets. The Jets could use him. They have no quarterback whatsoever.
Right.
All right, I mean, bunch of rookies. They got the McCown guy that's, older, and he's patched it together, but he's not going to be the guy that's going to lead you to the Super Bowl. But I wonder if they've got all the pieces in place. I mean, do they have enough pieces in place?
They don't, I don't think. I think that maybe you look at somebody like the Cardinals, who also could use a quarterback now that Carson Palmer retired. But then again, I don't know that they have the pieces either. I don't know if there's that team out there that's just sitting there waiting on a quarterback, ready to make a Super Bowl run based on, that one guy, right? So, I mean,
right.
You try to think of some of the different teams, and we just thought of a few there. I think the Jets' biggest obstacle is that the Patriots are still in their division.
Right.
So that's going to be tough to overcome. And then even somebody like the Cardinals, you have the Rams in that division who won it last year. The Seahawks and 49ers are going to be good also. So, let's see.
Well, here's another team. Let's look at the Minnesota Vikings. Okay. I mean, the Minnesota Vikings have Sam Bradford, who, I'm sorry, good quarterback, but he's done.
Yeah.
Right. You've got Teddy Bridgewater, hasn't played in 2 years. I mean, we don't know what you're going to get from him if he comes back. But the interesting thing is you got Case Keenum. Okay. Now here's Case Keenum, who doesn't have the pedigree that a Manning or a Brady or a Breeze has, but he basically played the best football of his life this year and led the Vikings to the NFC Championship game. Okay. So if you're the Vikings, you have an interesting decision here, don't you? I mean, do you sign Case Keenum and make him your franchise quarterback with the hopes that he's going to be able to continue that? Or do you go out and get Kirk Cousins? I mean, the Vikings have all the pieces in place. I mean, they're going to get their running back, Dalvin Cook, from injury. They've got a first-rate defense in place. They're going to have, their offensive line is pretty good. They need a couple receivers, but they're ready to win. So I think that would be a good place for Kirk Cousins if the Vikings decide that Case Keenum is not their guy. And if they do decide he's not their guy, maybe they could trade him to a Broncos or to a Bills or to a Cardinals, and then sign Kirk Cousins. All right. So that might be a good fit for Kirk Cousins. So it's going to be interesting. And I think the other thing that you got to factor into this is from the Kirk Cousins side of it. Does he go for the money? Does he take the biggest contract that he's offered? Or does he go somewhere where he thinks he's got a chance to win right away? And that's going to be another factor. In other words, take a little bit less money to go somewhere where you think all the pieces are in place, where you can make a run at the Super Bowl right away.
Yeah. That will be interesting in his specific situation. Look at a couple of other guys here. You got Le'Veon Bell, who's an unrestricted free agent.
Right.
The thing with him is the franchise tag, where he said that he's not going to play under the tag again. He was tagged this past year. He would, I think he said, most likely retire rather than play under the franchise tag again. So, do you think you see him coming back to the Steelers under a long-term deal, or how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think that's a bluff. I mean, because I don't know the exact number of what the franchise tag is for a running back, but he's going to be making at least $15-16 million if he comes back under the franchise tag. Now, the flip side of that is, even if you're the quarterback, I mean, Kirk Cousins made $30 million last year playing under the franchise tag.
Right.
And you might think, hey, that's great. But if you get hurt, remember, that's a 1-year deal. Okay.
Right.
So you're done. All right. So that's the downside for the player. But I don't see Le'Veon Bell retiring, okay, at the prime of his career if the Steelers franchise him. I think that the Steelers will probably work out some sort of deal with him to keep him in Pittsburgh, or they'll trade him, okay? and move him on to somewhere else that can sign him, and they'll pick up somebody else, because you got to remember the dynamics of the position here. I mean, quarterbacks are a different breed. I mean, we've talked about this before. You've got to have a franchise quarterback if you're going to win a Super Bowl. I mean, you can count on one hand. In fact, you can count on probably 3 fingers the number of teams that have won a Super Bowl with a non-franchise quarterback. Okay, so you've got to have that guy. Running backs are a dime a dozen. I mean, you can get rid of Le'Veon Bell tomorrow, and you can draft or make a trade to draft Saquon Barkley from Penn State, and you could be just as good next year as you were with Le'Veon Bell. Right. Okay, but you can't do that with a quarterback. All right, that's the key there in football. So I think it would behoove Le'Veon Bell to try to work out a long-term deal with the Steelers, or ask the Steelers to trade him where he can go somewhere else, because it's just a different animal when you talk about running backs and quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think you say that every year, where you look at, especially people who play fantasy football, or we used to, I know, but you look up in week 7 or 8 and you got running backs that are producing at a high level, and you're like, who is this guy? Like, he was a 4th round pick, or
right, or
they signed him as an undrafted free agent. I think that running backs are kind of somewhat a dime a dozen, unless you get like an outlier like Adrian Peterson or somebody like that, who's a top draft pick.
Right.
And you said it, the quarterback is key. So that'll be interesting here as the offseason progresses, and I think I saw the free agency officially starts March 4th, around the 14th.
March 4th,
so.
yeah.
March 4th, yeah.
Right.
That'll be. I'm sure all the reports of guys signing right at the midnight deadline will come out, and that'll be a topic we'll touch on again here in the future.
No question.
Absolutely. Okay, so that'll do it for today's episode of the Press Box Podcast. We appreciate you joining us for this episode. Last episode of February. As we look into March, we'll have some more good guests for you guys coming up through the month of March, as we we'll get to talk a little bit more baseball here, because baseball season starts a little earlier this year, late March actually, not even in April. So baseball will be starting up, and if there's any news of these some of these NCAA tournament basketball teams being affected at all from these scandals, whether it's NCAA sanctions or self-imposed sanctions to avoid divorce penalties, and that majorly affects the NCAA tournament. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So lots of good stuff coming up in the Press Box Podcast.